Frontline communities in Washington State have a voice at the 2022 UN Climate Conference in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt.
The Just Transition Alliance will join with the It Takes Roots Coalition in a collective effort to ensure that the various policies being proposed at COP27 are rooted in justice for workers, frontline communities, and the environment. In collaboration with Rainier Avenue Radio, Environmental Justice Coalition Front and Center is producing this local to global report on the front lines. I'm Edgar Franks of Familias Unidas por la Justicia, an independent farmworker union and front and center member organization based in Skagit Valley with over 500 members across Washington State. And this is Crash the COP27 with Jill and Edgar from On the Front Lines.
Shout out to Rainier Avenue Radio. Special thanks to Tony D and his team at Rainier Avenue Radio for broadcasting our frontline community reporting. And shout out to Environmental Justice Coalition Front and Centered for producing this local to global report on the front lines. This is Crash the Cop 27 with Jill and Edgar. How are you doing? How are you doing, Edgar?
Good. Today was kind of our first day that we actually kind of sat down as a whole delegation and kind of went over some key things of why we're here. Also, maybe there was discussions, what's been missing into the narratives. So I think that was a pretty good kind of exciting first day. The first couple of days have just been us kind of getting adjusted, like getting our bodies ready and our minds ready and settling into the new time zones, new environment. So today was, kind of like preparing us for the next 2 weeks. So that was really nice. Tomorrow is the official day that the COP starts. And it was, I'm just, excited that it's finally here, after months of preparation and all the calls and readings and, it's finally here. So we're ready to go.
That's awesome. And you're there with the It Takes Roots Coalition, which it's the alliance of alliances of climate justice and just transition, organizers and communities from around the world, right? Like it's pretty national.
Kind of like an international coalition. It takes roots. Mostly it's folks based in the U.S., but because of the work that has been done and the alliances that have been built throughout the years, making key strategic alliances with like La Villa Campesina, the World March of Women, Friends of the Earth, like all these other groups that also care about human rights and social justice and climate justice. Those friendships and have been formed, and now our delegation, yes, we are part like of a U.S. based delegation, but are directly tied to these other global organizations. So it's really interesting to see. It's very different than we're used to like the local organizing networks that are built, but this is like that, but on a global scale.
Yeah, I mean the United Nations Conference of Parties, or as the Just Transition Alliance rebranded, the Conference of Profiteers.
Yes,
it's major. Like there are people gathering from like governments coming together to talk about how to limit global temperature and adapt and stuff like that. But are they really talking to the people who are impacted, the workers and the community members, the indigenous folks that are, in the It Takes Roots Coalition or have been doing this work for years and defending their communities for years?
I mean, and the short answer is like the people in the COP, like the official negotiators are talking to the people that are on the front lines. Is the answer is probably no. I mean, it's positively no. And they are definitely talking a lot about the issues that day-to-day people are concerned about. Definitely aren't talking about like militarization and the role military plays in climate injustice, so, and the militarization, so of communities, so that are all linked into climate. So, a lot of the funding actually, I think there was like a study from last year about just how much money governments have been spending on border security, way over than what they're actually putting into like climate resilience plans. To that point, right, about how resources, money is getting used and for what reasons and purposes and for what. That's actually going to be one of the big discussion points tomorrow, I think, at the negotiations. I don't know if I had mentioned this earlier, but there's a theme, like even if you go into the official UNFCCC webpage, there's a whole section on climate finance and all the funds that need to be raised to put in place to redistribute to communities that are already facing the impacts of climate change. However, I think there's been a big, I think climate finance is very different when we think about like funding and resourcing communities, right? Because the way that it's being talked about here is, these investor groups or companies or corporations and governments, they see the climate as another component of how they can get a return on investment. So, it's not just about giving money to communities that need it the most, but it's also like, how can I give money and profit off the climate, the climate catastrophes and the climate related issues that are happening. So there's a big discussion on climate financing. But again, like you were saying, a lot of those voices that of the people that really need all these resources and money and everything to just stay alive, that voice is missing. But the banks, the investors, and the wealthy countries, they're at the table deciding, right, that is it worth or not to put in money if we're not going to get a return on investment. If it's not driven by profit or a motive like that, then is it worth even doing? Even though they've already promised like climate commitment acts and all these other, like the $100 billion fund, none of that is actually happening because of everybody's like still fighting about how is that money going to be raised and if they're going to get their money back and more.
Yeah,
and everybody just waits. We have to wait around and just for these billionaires and millionaires to figure out what they want while everybody else has to suffer.
That's right. I think it was in I'm reading here in 2009. That's when the first world countries pledged to provide the third world countries with $100 billion a year in climate financing by 2020. So 2020 was 2 years ago, and still these rich countries haven't delivered. And yeah, they're still trying to figure out how do they protect their bottom line? How do they get their return? I have some thoughts, like one of the big reasons that third world countries are so impoverished is because of the the debts that have been imposed on them,
right,
by the World Bank and by these countries after plundering their resources. They have to borrow money, and so what if we just forgive their debts? Let them not have to carry it, so they can actually develop their country the way they need to and not be beholden to these debts or these criteria.
Right, and I think that's like the big issue, right? This whole climate financing is going to be probably administered through the World Bank. And along with that financing comes like this other debt that countries have to carry on top of the other debts that they probably have to pay back to the World Bank. So it's like another way of keeping, power over all these countries by just, dangling these dollar signs over their heads.
Right.
But we always know, and every time there's like things like this, that it just means like more privatization or further deregulation of like local markets, land grabs, all these other things. It opens the door for a lot of things like that.
Yeah.
So I think that's been a big concern. The climate, the further debt countries have to get into just to even try to access any of these like climate funds. So that's a big concern. And again, we always talk about like just transition, and the transition is coming, and but is it going to be a just one for everyone? This definitely does not fit into the just transition framework that we work with.
Yeah. And honestly, like the more and more focus is on investments and finance, like it's still tied to like how much money, right?
Yeah.
I think the measure of success shouldn't be around how much money is being raised or how much money is being invested or returned, but rather like how many how many lives are being saved or how many forests are being saved, or the actual reductions. That's something that I'm hopeful that again, like the focus can shift away from dollar signs to more like the people and the planet. What this really is about, because it's really about the survival of our communities.
But like everywhere you go here, even in like all the other prior COPs that I've been to, just so much like greenwashing, like every business now has like a net zero like target, or like, this is you buy this one thing, we're gonna plant a tree somewhere else, or trying to be carbon neutral, like every corporation and like Coca-Cola and like Nestle and all these like companies notorious for stealing people's water and polluting, all of a sudden like have like this greenwashing campaign, which is really hard to you see it everywhere, but that PR stuff like works on a lot of people.
Yeah, it's like there's always some new lingo that they or rebranding that these companies come up with, or it's a new whatchamacallit, a new gimmick, like
they're pretty smart in how they like repackage themselves, but it's like the same exact thing. Yeah, I think that's another big thing that we're talking about here, like about exposing the false solutions. And also, that net zero is actually not zero. So that's just another like, corporate rebranding. That net zero actually doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really interesting to see all the contradictions right here, especially in a climate space, right? And not only that it's so difficult to have grassroots communities actually participate in any of these talks. So it's not a very, for us, it could, something they're like, this is, decisions are made, but it's for just looking at it from like this perspective, it's like very undemocratic because not everybody has equal access to the negotiations.
These COPs, they happen every year. And do you see any like, I know you just got there, but maybe looking out for like what are the differences between last year and this year? Like, are there any differences? Are there any? Is there space for more democratic like conversation or a way for like everyday people to participate more, or is it just the same?
I think it's very difficult for just for just regular or people to be in these places. Well, it's very inaccessible, right? Because I mean, it's in a resort town. I mean, like and it's expensive to be here. So we were lucky enough to like be invited and kind of bring our perspective. But that's luck. And again, to have an impact, to have like a physical, you have to have like big numbers to actually be noticed sometimes. And it's really hard to get in here and really try to organize in these places that are very hard to get to for just regular everyday working people. So it's very hard. And again, like the accreditation within the UN space is very difficult. The participation, all that is very complicated, and everything is done online. You have to get visas and passports, and that gets expensive, and all of it. There's like barrier after barrier after barrier for just like somebody that wants to engage and participate. It's very difficult. So you really have to be very privileged to make it this far. So I always like try to remember that, like, this is like, I'm very lucky to be here. So when we're here, you gotta represent all the folks that that are counting us to make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the whole structure as it is, it's very difficult to like even to have your voice heard, because this structure has been almost put in place. It's like from our point of view, it's been kind of like captured by corporate control, like of this whole system. Mm-hmm. So that's why we get all these like false solutions and things that like that narrative becomes the narrative. And to get our narrative, we don't have the same amount of PR and resources that like Exxon has or anything like that. So we have to make as much noise as we can so we can get noticed.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we experienced that here in Washington when we were fighting the cap and trade bill. How complete disregard for frontline communities who are impacted, or people who would be living next to these, like who already are living in unhealthy environmental justice sacrifice zones, basically. Unfortunately, the state legislature went with the false solution of creating a market, a credit system to allow polluters to pollute and also generate resources, saying that they'll use the resources for climate resilience or for development, but on the backs of the people who have to continue to see more pollution in their community increase. And I'm wondering, like, where are these billions and dollars of climate financing gonna come from? Is it gonna come from like everyday people and their taxes, or or from carbon offsets, or is it gonna come from the polluters themselves? I just don't know where all these where they're gonna come up with these billions of dollars that they're talking about.
Right, and again, because there is no accountability, like and then nobody's like really held accountable. I mean, you can just promise like a whole bunch of things, like, oh, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that, but there's really no accountability. It's just like, they get a lot of press, like, oh, such and such corporation just said that they were going to lower their emissions by this much percent. But, nobody really holds accountable or like ask the hard questions about like how are you going to do that and by when. I think today somebody had shared a story about BP, about how they were going to like pledge by like I forgot what year, but 2050 or something, to reduce their emissions by 30%. But their strategy was actually not the way that they were saying that they're going to lower their emissions. They didn't say that. They were actually going to sell off their dirtiest assets to somebody else. So it looked like they weren't polluting, but the whole, whatever the plant or wherever they were drilling or whatever is actually still going to keep going, but under a different entity. But they can claim like, oh, we just cut our emissions by 30% right there.
Yeah. And similarly, there is a forest carbon offset program here in King County, which the biggest user of it is Microsoft.
Oh, wow. Big surprise.
To offset their emissions. However, it has not actually reduced, has not resulted in meeting their goals of actual direct reductions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's a way to look. It looks good. I'm gonna we'll share the link to the King County carbon forest offset program. I think it started, it's been a couple years now. Urban credits, rural credits that companies can purchase. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, even locally. And then they say that the resources go towards cleaning up the environment, sustaining and making our communities healthier.
Again, we don't know what any of that means. What does that mean?
Yeah.
What is cleaning up the environment, or keeping our communities healthy? I don't know what any of that means. They're just broad kind of just language that people look at. It looks and hears nice, especially coming from a corporation.
Right.
And also who doesn't want to preserve forests and trees and all that stuff? But I think the intentions is different than what they're leading on.
Yeah, what's actually happening, especially this year, things are getting serious on the ground. I hope that more and more people get this wake up call. It's hard to ignore anymore, and the world leaders and these corporations just really need to step aside or hear these demands of people and actually take action. Because
and I think it's a lot of people were hear a lot of these news and get depressed because everything is evil. But there's also, if you look around communities, there's a lot of communities that are already doing a lot of things to help out and actually have projects that are good for the environment, for the climate. So I think that's something that we still need to remember, that even despite everything that looks bad, there's still people organizing that haven't given up, and they're still trying to create the world that it's healthy. All the values that we talk about, people are they're working on them still right now, even despite all the challenges, with no money and barely any kind of support, but they're still out there organizing and building. So I think that's something that still hasn't been kind of taken away from us, that we can still create even in this time of crisis.
That's right. Yeah, it is really the community and grassroots movements that have been our first responders, been the folks organizing in these crises, even before the pandemic, and and people are going to continue to do that, with or without the government support. We really do need the government to step up and start representing people, not the corporations. But we also can't wait for them, to, and And yeah, I've seen folks really like even in locally here fight for that Green New Deal so that there are local resources that can be utilized to support communities during climate crises. So it's starting, it starts with the grassroots. Starts
Yeah.
with people.
So I think that's something that we still have to keep in mind, that all these things, like, they're possible if we want them, and we're gonna fight for them.
Well, I think that's all we have time for our show. But thank you, Edgar, for today's report. Yeah, we'll talk to you tomorrow.
All right. Thanks for hosting the show.
This reporting of COP27 is part of a collaboration with Rainier Avenue Radio and is also part of a new environmental justice podcast, On the Front Lines. The first season of On the Front Lines explores people's movements in the Philippines, cooperative farms, frontline community health in Washington, the dangers of false solutions such as nuclear energy and carbon markets, the promise of the just transition framework, and a project celebrating the untold stories of Nikkei farmers in Bellevue. 10 episodes feature local and global guests, including frontline advocates, organizers, workers, filmmakers, artists, and more. Look for the podcast via website at frontandcenter.org or search for On the Front Lines. Available now on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Anyways, that's all for now. See you soon on Crash the Cop with Jill and Edgar.
On Rainier Avenue Radio.world, look for the Change Your Food, Change Your Life show. I'm Dennis Weaver, your good food guide and host, helping you to feel good and look good, and who wouldn't want some of that? All that and more from the Change Your Food, Change Your Life show on Rainier Avenue Radio.world. Stories, songs, and guests. Begin living the organic good food life, and the rest of your life just may be the best of your life. Hose up, baby, to your health.
PrEP is a daily pill that can significantly reduce your chances of getting HIV. And typically, it takes a trip to a physician to get it. Now, you can visit select pharmacies, get tested on the spot, and walk away with your first month of PrEP. Plus, you'll also walk away with a $50 gift card after you complete your pharmacy visit. It's easier than ever to protect yourself from HIV. To find your nearest participating pharmacy, go to doh.wa.gov/PrEP now. From the Washington State Department of Health and Public Health, Seattle, and King County.
This is Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
Frontline communities in Washington State have a voice at the 2022 UN Climate Conference in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt.
The Just Transition Alliance will join with the It Takes Roots Coalition in a collective effort to ensure that the various policies being proposed at COP27 are rooted in justice for workers, frontline communities, and the environment. In collaboration with Rainier Avenue Radio, Environmental Justice Coalition Front and Center is producing this local to global report on the front lines. I'm Edgar Franks of Familias Unidas por la Justicia, an independent farm worker union and front and center member organization. based in Skagit Valley with over 500 members across Washington State. And this is Crash the Cop 27 with Jill and Edgar from On the Front Lines.
Shout out to Rainier Avenue Radio. Special thanks to Tony D and his team at Rainier Avenue Radio for broadcasting our frontline community reporting. And shout out to Environmental Justice Coalition Front End Centered for producing this local to global report on the front lines. This is Crash the Cop 27 with Jill and Edgar.
I feel like it's great that we have a podcast and we're getting the word out about the COP and the climate negotiations, especially in light of like the richest man in the world, Elon Musk, like buying Twitter.
Yeah.
I feel like the social media is becoming less democratic and more privatized, less public,
Yeah. So I think that's the kind of the cool thing about community radio and community podcast, and just all using the different things that we have at our disposal to get different perspectives that are not controlled by like corporate media or billionaires, to like kind of shape the way they think into their worldview. So I think this is very, very vital, especially, important to how information gets shared with social movements.
Yeah, I mean, our education system waters down a lot of our history, and so we gotta tell it how it is. So
yeah. And I also going back to something about like the COP and how people they want to know more about it. I talked to Jose Bravo, who's been involved for a long, long time on this issue on climate justice, and he has actually a pretty profound history. Like even going back to when there was no COP at all. Like it was, I think the first was like the Rio, like conference on climate or something like that, like in the 90s, early 90s. He was kind of mentioning to me how there has been 3 kind of branches within the COP space. There's like the financial and like the economics. I mean, the financial economics and the fossil fuels and the science. And that for the last couple of like 10 COPs, they've only seek to address like or talk about like fossil fuels and economics, but never like listening to the science. Even like last year, like scientists were doing things that were like way out of the norm, right? Like they were like chaining themselves to power plants and like doing blockades and kind of calling attention to just how urgent the crisis is. There's like report after report now that shows like, we have 20 years to do something before we reach like a point of no return. And then other people are like, no, we actually have like 10 years, less than 10 years now. And the scientists, I think, have been ringing the alarms, and I think at this point they're just like in like what else can we do? We've like studied this already and have given recommendations, but still nothing real drastic has changed. So, I think they take the direct action approach, yeah. I think is
okay. Sounds like scientists have these scientists who have been, the ringing the bell, holding the bell, or like trying to flag this issue for years are realizing, exhausted all their other outlets and just, have to organize and take action. Like, direct action.
Well, and again, I think along with I think they're siding more with communities that have been saying this for decades also, and about how this is unsustainable and it's hurting people's health and the planet's health. Like indigenous communities have been saying this for many generations, and as science now has these scientists that that Western countries listen to the most have been saying the same thing that many communities on the front lines have been saying. So it's still still a fight everywhere. Then I think that shows the importance of why the solidarity piece is important, and kind of rethinking and reframing the whole narrative about who we listen to. Like, do we listen to scientists or like communities? You know, like you could actually do both. You know, scientists can listen to communities because usually the communities are correct because they're on the ground. For today, we're still trying to get a lot of our crew trying to get our accreditation, like our credentials. So we went back to the UN space, the blue zone. However, today was the first round of negotiations. So they closed down a big portion of the space for those negotiations that are private. Only what they call the parties, again, the parties are the countries, were able to participate in those. No civil society groups were really allowed to intervene. And tomorrow it's going to be the same thing, where it's going to be closed negotiations. Some of them are streamed, like some big speeches by world leaders that will be available online. Today they had the opening remarks from world leaders and the welcome from the host countries. And also, you know, so we ended up going to the blue zone for a bit, and then we went to the green zone. The green zone is a place with it's open to most people. You have to register for it, and you still have to register and get like permission to go in. But that's a place that you can go in and like check out a lot of different pavilions. There's 5 pavilions. There's like a private sector, academia, financial institutions, like NGOs. Like each pavilion has like a different thing where they, they have a government pavilion as well. But they have like little booths, and you can go and talk to the people there and see what like each booth is. A lot of them are kind of like what we call greenwashing. A lot of it is like about, you know, Boeing is here and this is how they're gonna lower emissions. You know, if you buy a ticket, they're gonna lower emissions by planting 1 million trees. You know, just like all these things. You know, like our target is net zero. A whole bunch of stuff on net zero. And again, our stance is that net zero is not zero, and it's not a just transition. Yesterday you were talking about Microsoft, and we actually passed by the Microsoft pavilion, the booth that they had there. And there was, I don't know who was there, but there was like a guy talking, and he had like cameras and people were taking pictures. I don't know who he was, but he was talking, he was talking about like just a lot of like just buzzwords about, sustainability and a lot of words that, come out of like social justice. Like if you didn't know anything about what he was about, you would think it sounded really good what they were talking about. I like a lot of social justice things like sustainability and justice and equity and all these like words, but coming from somebody that was like partnering with Microsoft, kind of like scratch your head, considering kind of the stuff that we were talking about yesterday with Microsoft and Bill Gates, and how Bill Gates has been one of like the people that has, perpetrated like injustice in many ways, with like in Africa, the land grabs and trying to reform farming in Africa, and also buying up farmland and privatizing land. So, Bill Gates and Microsoft have a lot to do with why the system is the way it is, bad for communities.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the Gates family, has been using their quote wealth that they made on the backs of other people. Not gonna be shy about saying like they're not like self-made people. That many people were exploited so that their family can have all this money, and now they're using their wealth to buy up land. I think Community Alliance for Global Justice has this campaign on holding the Gates family accountable for their being the biggest landowner in the Americas,
Mm-hmm. Right.
Buying up farmland, as well as what they did in Africa, like under like trying to buy up land there too, saying that they're for food sovereignty, when we know that food sovereignty is really about the people owning their own, means to
Yeah.
grow their own food and the land, and have a autonomy over their own food system, not Gates family. So yeah, they're big landlord, making a lot of money off of this green economy. Um, and then to the point of like net zero, or let's just put on the table like net zero. I even heard about like what is it? Net negative.
Yeah, they
People
come
just
up with all these like this
I know.
language, this weird language that
Yeah.
doesn't make sense.
So, like this mug of mine, this travel mug, if I were to like throw it on the ground, litter it, or throw it in the ocean, and then I turn around and, plant a tree, this mug still exists and it's still at the bottom of the ocean. It's still litter. Like it's still a concrete like waste. Me planting a tree does not absolve that, You can't just finagle numbers and say that you're a better person or a better company because you're covering up your waste, your mess, your pollution. So it's just it's some business scheme again to make themselves look good when they're not really doing anything at all. Yeah, the cup is still at the bottom of the ocean. The pollution is still in our neighborhoods. Yeah.
Just like hundreds and hundreds of organizations are here. I was like, wow, like where do you come from? Just like from, and there's like so many organizations like that, and most of them are funded by like these big like the people that are pushing for like the market-based mechanisms and nature-based solutions, if they call them, right? Like so it's just like a bizarre kind of place to be, seeing that like all these, I mean, they're well funded. I mean, they probably have budgets that are in the millions. A lot of young people also like they're representing them, and just listening to them talk. I don't know if they believe what they're saying, but they how much access and influence they have here. It's kind of scary because again, this place is not really accessible for like working class people or people that are on the front lines that are actually having to deal with the problems, and the issues. And I don't know, it seems like it's an intentional thing to like leave out those voices, even how actions are going to be planned. It's very constricted and very monitored, and you could only do it at this one place for like 10 minutes or something. It's very limited on the actions you can have, and they're usually in places that are like that where nobody could see them. Like if you're trying to like reach the delegates and the people that are going to be negotiating, it's almost impossible to have like an action where they'll be like held to account, or like this is what you're doing. But like social movement spaces are kind of like left out like that, but yet these like big nonprofits that work side by side with corporations and the government's pushing market mechanisms are very present and just everywhere, just like saturated. Like even just walking around town, you can just see just how many people with their they're called observer, their badges, so you can just see like just thousands and thousands of people like that.
Wow. And just what you were saying just now, like made me think about that activity we do, the Just Transition School, where we have the cup of water, and we're like tipping it over, and it's the person who's right next to the cup who's like very alarmed and also ready to defend themselves, or ready to fight back, or ready to resist. And then the folks are around the room are like, trying to figure it out. Like, do they help? Do they stand and watch, or do they egg them on? I feel like, that tipping point, right? Like we're at that tipping point right now, and it's time to listen to the people who are sounding the alarm, who are resisting, and it sounds like, yeah, that sounds like they're trying to like hide those voices at this conference, and so it's a good thing that y'all's are there as a delegation. Um, yeah, and hoping we can continue to amplify your voices and let folks know you're there, resisting and sounding the alarm.
From this experience, I think, it's got to go to how we take things on at a global or a national or also like a state and local level, because a lot of the decisions that our state takes or the leadership that our state takes comes from this process, this United Nations framework. So, I think that's something we should also take into account, like, where our state, likes to think of itself as a climate leader, but they're following this framework that has basically said that it's okay for our solution to the climate crisis is more offsetting and more market-based mechanism. So they're doing all that, but yet still, not doing anything to fund or to resource the communities that are impacted. So I think that's like a thing that maybe going back home to try to tackle, like at the global level, is called like loss damage, almost like climate reparations, and I think within the state, that's something maybe like communities should start asking for, like, like communities that have been hurt by like nuclear facilities or refineries or coal plants or, pesticides, by the heat, or the cold, like all these like things that have been happening that could have been prevented a long, long time ago. So, how do those folks how do they pay for their climate debt that they owe to communities?
And making sure that those funds don't come from like sacrificing other communities.
Yeah,
I think
right.
the hard part is our state is doesn't have an income tax, doesn't really tax corporations, really relies heavily on sales and property tax.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, needs to figure out how they can resource the communities impacted without hurting other communities in the process.
Mm-hmm. Well, also I think like the competition for resources becomes like another big barrier, and I think that's the thing that divides the communities the most, right? They're like, oh, we have these grants, but there's only like a certain amount of money. So, and then like it becomes like a rush for community organizations to like fight over like these grants. And sometimes they're not even that much. For the amount of work that they have to do, it's like very minimal grants. But yet our community needs those money, and it creates like this competition instead of a cooperation within our folks. And again, and that creates like another distraction of like actually, instead of organizing and building power, we're like fighting for like these things that that take up so much time and energy and ends up dividing us. So I think that's like a word of caution, I think, for our people that are organizing.
It's true. Fighting over scraps, fighting each other. We got no time for that.
Yep.
But we also got to survive. So
yeah,
it's a very hard tension, that folks need the resources, but yeah, the way to get them is very difficult. And yeah, what would it look like if we all like work together? I think that was something beautiful about Front and Center when we first joined. Like there's a lot of partnering on resource generation, or trying to figure out how to support all the members. to have what they need to organize. And I think that, yeah, hopefully that we can emphasize those values around collaboration and not competition, so we can get further.
Yeah. And I don't know who said it, but I heard this like a couple of times from different people, right? Like we have to think of like not in terms of scarcity, like what capitalism wants to think, like, oh, everything is running out. But like, no, actually there's a lot, except people hoard it. So it's actually, there's an abundance of everything. But just even like when it comes to food, right? There's actually tons of food that's being produced already. Like, you know, there's enough food already to feed like 2.5 Earths. But just the way that it's distributed and the motives and the purpose of food production is not to feed people, it's for profits. And I think that's the same thing with like with finances, that there is actually a lot of money. It's just being hoarded by people that already have lots of it. You know, it's still following like the neoliberal trickle down economic stuff. Like, you know, if you know, you make rich people richer, eventually like money will fall out of their pockets and some will get to you. So I think that's still the mindset that we have going, is like, no, there's a scarcity that is manufactured for us to fight over that scarcity and like, you know, fight for that, while other people get to hoard the majority of the money and the resources and the power.
It's amazing, like, to think about how, you know, third world countries, the global south, are like so resource rich, and yet a lot of the people are poor. It makes me think how, especially like in the Philippines, right? Like there's so much, there's enough land to feed everybody there, all 100 million people, but the country is so poor because it's corrupt and, you know, allowing for foreign corporations to take these resources and away. The people don't have ownership or access to it. Yeah, I think if we were to change everything, you know, how it should be, folks would have a better life.
The White House just released kind of their statement on the U.S.'s role in addressing climate change. So I kind of just glanced at it a little bit. I know that was like a big thing last year, especially like when Biden, I think it was like Biden's first year, he was pledging like all these commitments of funding and the climate fund and all these other things. And then as soon as he got back home, he like issued a whole bunch of like drilling permits to fossil fuel for offshore drilling. So I just saw it, like something just popped up right now about that. So I think reading off what the White House, that statement, I think that could also be like a little guide about how we hold our country accountable while here at the COP. So I think that's even within the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, even though it's supposed to be like to help poor people get by, a lot of it was just giveaways to the fossil fuel corporation and like fast tracking drilling and permitting and like pipelines. So, you know, I think we have to, you know, hold Biden accountable and tell him to do better. And I think just because he's a Democrat doesn't mean that he's off the hook. He's still, you know, they're still being beholden to the fossil fuel industry. So I think being at COP, I think, well, hopefully we get to see some of our delegation and tell them to do better.
That's right. Yeah. If you're going to be a climate champion, be a climate champion. Don't drill anymore. But I do have to go back to the bakery and go back to work.
All right.
It's great seeing you. Keep it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Take care. Okay. I'll talk to you soon, Edgar.
All right. Thank you, Jill.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
This reporting of COP27 is part of a collaboration with Rainier Avenue Radio and is also part of a new environmental justice podcast, On the Front Lines. The first season of On the Front Lines explores people's movements in the Philippines, cooperative farms, frontline community health in Washington, the dangers of false solutions such as nuclear energy and carbon markets, the promise of the just transition framework, and a project celebrating the untold stories of Nikkei farmers in Bellevue. 10 episodes feature local and global guests, including frontline advocates, organizers, workers, filmmakers, artists, and more. Look for the podcast via website at frontandsummer.org or search for On the Front Lines. Available now on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Anyways, that's all for now. See you soon on Crash the Cop with Jill and Edgar.